I don't have a huge amount of experience with judging. I've been sanctioned for less than a year. But however, I am in my private life a IT manager, people manager, have been so for 10 or 15 years. And I believe there's some usefulness to be gained from that field in magic. In particular, I want to talk about the Cynefin Framework. So what is Cynefin? Cynefin is, well, at its most basic level, it's a Welsh word. It means habitat. It means your familiar environment. It's a complicated translation. And what it means in this context is it's a decision-making framework. It's a methodology that lets you deal with ambiguity, make decisions in the correct way for the situation you are facing. It embraces the idea that there are different approaches that are appropriate for different situations. At its best level, it's something that a manager or a judge in this case would be keeping in mind as they approach any situation that calls for decisions. Where it's most commonly used, though, is trying to work out where you went wrong. It can be an analysis tool. So I handled that situation badly. What should I have done? Oh, this is the way we were doing it. It's a really, really key part of IT manager training, but it's also a really, really key part for anything that requires first responders. So ambulance, paramedics, disaster recovery, police, all get training in this area. In a lot of ways, there is a lot of similarity between first responders and magic judges. You are being called to resolve an issue with a game. Now, what it does is separates all decision-making areas around four basic domains they're referred to as simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. There's a reason I'll get into later why the ordering is like this, but we'll get to that. The domains focus, one of the ways these domains are separated is in determining cause and effect. In the simple cases, the cause, there's an immediate effect. It's really, really obvious. In the complicated cases, effect follows cause, but it can be non-obvious. It can be multiple steps. In the complex scenario, cause and effect are related, but it might be a number of causes with a number of effects, and there's an overall domain that those live in, but not necessarily 1, 2, 3, 4. And finally, chaotic. There is no cause and effect relationship in place. The simple domain. The simple domain is about known knowns. You know everything about the situation. It's really fairly obvious where you're at. It's defined for basically there's known situations, known responses, and there's a decision-making pattern that is resolved. That is what you do, what the best practice. So sense. You collect the information necessary to identify the solution, you categorize, you determine which solution to apply, and then you respond by applying that solution. Now, in magic judging, the vast majority of things that you do should live in this area. We have copious amounts of simple procedures to deal with obvious problems. There's, as I said, it's a strong basis in this category, and most problems can be resolved in the simple domain. Most problems that actually fall into the other contexts can be resolved by simplifying them down into this, or a series of these. Okay? Complicated. Known unknowns. So we've got a situation, there are some questions that need to be answered. we know what those questions, we know what those issues are. We just have to ask the right questions. So we collect the necessary information to identify the pattern. We analyse, we break the problem down. Now, that can be through questions, it can be through basic investigations, and then we respond. Now, what this may resolve in is a set of simple, you take a complicated situation and resolve it into several simple solutions. So in terms of magic, this category is simple investigations. The one, when you've come up and you've had to ask a few questions to resolve what's happened. Now, there could be one person has stuffed up, they've committed a rules infraction, and then their opponent makes a rules infraction that follows the first player's infraction. And you have to resolve that, you have to back it up, all the various different ways that you do that. We following? Anyone think of any complicated solution? Any complicated problems?
Well, to me, like a simple one is like it's turn, like later in the game, someone says, "Oh, I played an extra. I think you may have played an extra lane." Oh, I don't think so. That's the sort of thing where if you know the right question to ask, like, "Oh, what turn is this? How many lanes in hand? How many cards in hand?" Or like turn 3, if you know the right questions to ask, you can figure out the answer. And I think that's an example I can think of where if you go, "Oh, I think I drew an extra card," or I played an island. You should know the questions to ask to get to your answer.
I say this all the time with life totals. To be able to agree on it, I have to go back and track damage or draw cards.
Something I should have mentioned at the start of this, I'm light on magic. As I said, I've only been a judge for about a year. I do this all the time. I'm very happy to hear from your examples of these problem domains in practice, because most of the people in this room probably have much more experience with this than I do. Complex. We don't know what we don't. This is the unknown situation. This is where a simple investigation may not be enough. The pattern that we use in these situations is different. We probe. We need to experiment. We need to say, we need to look beyond the obvious questions, and we need to maybe ask spectators. We need to ask the questions more widely. We need to perhaps even ask, like, what if sort of questions. A little bit more obvious than what happened, more expanded from just what happened in this scenario. Then we sense, and then we respond. Again, the response in this area is most likely going to be a series of simple domain problems. It would be very unusual for you to immediately respond into just one thing. It's not. If it's as simple as that, this isn't a complex problem. I would put problems in this domain in terms of magic judging to be the more complex investigations, the ones where there's a dispute as to what's actually happened, where you've got to actually do things like take photos of their scorecards, take photos of the board situation, try and work it all out before with that, like try and work out who's correct and who's not.
I think actually a lot more judge calls might fall under complex than just your complex investigations. Very famous judge call that I love to joke about is someone once called me over and said, "Judge points to a card in his hand and says, 'Does this resolve?'" I believe that is a complex solution because I need to know what on earth that player is talking about.
Yeah, like a question asking, like a person asking the wrong question could be under the thing of unknown unknowns. Like if they're asking a question and you're like, "I don't know what you're asking, and I don't know if I understand." So that's when you have to start asking. Like someone asks, "Oh, does
you
this
need
work?"
to give me some context.
Yeah, if someone like points to a card with activate ability and then go, "Oh, points and points," and goes, "Does this work?" That's something where you need to probe. You feel like, "Are you asking X?" And then no, I want to know if this worked. And you go, okay, can you explain more? And then you start working down, layering down the questions until you get to a more refined. Oh, you want to know if you do this, X will happen? And they go, yes. And you go, cool. And you work down that way.
And does this work is probably one of the most common judge calls.
Yeah, does this work? Or can I do this? Or they assume, you have a
this.
meeting of the minds when they're doing something. You're like, I don't understand, but you can't just be like helping them. So you have to. There's an approach you have to take. You can't just
Absolutely.
be like.
And I think by the very nature of you having to hide information or having to respect hidden information in the game and not being able to give any strategic advice and having to watch your language, problems that in any other domain would probably fall below complex become complex because they have to be unknowns.
Yeah,
Yes.
like you can't answer like yes or no sometimes. If someone says, "Oh, can I do this?" You can say that's a legal play. You can't say yeah if because they'll ask in such a way. It's like, "Oh, if I do this, does it work?" Because you have to like make assumptions. If you do it that way, it's way more complex than it should be in the environment.
Yeah, and especially questions like does this work? I can't ask you, is this the correct play to make? But that's kind of what they're asking. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes they don't know they're asking that. They just like it's their first on things.
Chris.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm probably wrong because I'm not familiar with this, but it seems like your four things line up with simple being should this have happened, complicated could this have happened, complex being will this happen, and chaotic can this happen.
Possibly.
So I almost think that there's like a rotation. Like I think the simple more the things that normally get resolved by players on their own, where
Yes.
they're just like, the rules of the games actually say this,
Yeah.
and they're just like,
Yes.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
like I drew an extra
Absolutely.
card, judge, and you come over and say, "Oh, I did this, and I drew an extra card." It's like, yep, simple.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's the vast majority of judge calls that most of us would receive would fall into that simple category.
I think the vast majority of judge calls are the layer up.
Okay.
Because players tend to solve those simple
At least-
problems.
at least
at regular at
at
least.
regular, yeah.
Players tend to solve those simple problems like, I tapped the wrong color mana, like, and they're just like, yeah, I did. They tend to solve those things themselves.
I've actually found they do solve a lot of the simple stuff themselves at comp as well.
Which not as good, but
Well, actually, no. That's because in the RPG it does have a line there saying that if the players solve a situation to their mutual satisfaction, a judge doesn't need to be involved.
Yep.
So
Fine.
there
Within the
is
rules.
the capability for that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it does hinder your ability to do an investigation if a player, say, always taps their mana roll.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Chaos. This is interesting. But before I was talking about known unknowns and all that sort of stuff. That's not the situation with chaos. In this situation, there is no order. The situation is literally out of control. The first thing that you should do is act to establish some form of order. Then you go into sense and respond. Act to do something. So a chaotic situation is possibly where two players are beginning to get out of their seats, they're yelling at each other. One of the things I've heard recommended, I should say is by a fairly physically imposing judge, was what he would do in that situation was physically put his hand in the middle of the table, right? Just physically impose himself between the two players who are beginning to get aggressive. He reckons in 9 times out of 10 situations, both players will back away from him slightly, and that will immediately de-escalate the situation just because he has made that action. There are 2 particular points the Cynefin model talks about very explicitly in chaotic situations. Safety. Chaotic situations cover the areas where things can be completely out of control. You may have someone turn up at your tournament who's on drugs, very intoxicated, and take a swing at you or something. in which case you get out of there.
Little edit for the future, yourself, the players from the situation, so that
No, I disagree.
Okay.
No, because if you are moving the players out of the situation, you are acting.
Okay.
Okay? There's a situation where you just might have to simply get away from the person before he hits you. Then you can act.
Okay.
Right? So there's that. There's the other category of chaotic situations, the wicked problem. Anything you do is going to make things worse. But you have to make things worse before things can get better. Interesting case of a wicked problem that's very local is abortion law in Queensland. We haven't had a meaningful change in abortion law for over 100 years in Queensland. And that's because both sides are equally dissatisfied. Sorry, you asking? No, scratch my head. Both sides are equally dissatisfied. The pro-lifers like the fact that it's illegal. The pro-choicers acknowledge that it's actually reasonably easy to get an abortion in Queensland. You just have to say to the doctor that you are undergoing some form of mental stress. And that's a wicked problem, because they don't want to address it properly in law to make it legal, because the potential from the point of view of the pro-choicers is that that law will finally be enforced, and the potential from the pro-lifers is that it will become legal. So it's a wicked problem. Now those sort of problems can, the chaotic domain has many examples of wicked problems. Okay, so you just need to be aware of that as well. Anyone got any examples? No violent players? Okay.
I think my example, the final one.
Yes,
yeah,
but you were intimidated.
Well, I was intimidated because I felt that if I ruled against the guy, he would have, because he was stolen, he might check me.
Yeah.
And that would leave the store with no head judge.
One of the interesting things about the Cynefin model is that it's actually subjective from the point of view of the person who is trying to apply it. It matters, repetition matters, experience matters. If you were a level 2, you would have encountered, or level 3 or whatever, you would have encountered most judging situations multiple times. And things that are complex for a level 1 will become quite routine for a level 2, simply because of the number of times they've encountered it. In the case of intimidating, I don't think you could be intimidated in that manner now.
Well, if the guy's big enough.
Not to the same degree though, not every time.
Yeah, like
Yes.
there was, like it did get worse for a bit, but then it got sorted out.
Yes.
We had to actually go through wizards, not the judge program, to handle that stuff.
But yes, but again, this is moving what is a complicated problem to be actually a complex problem, because part of the problem is your inexperience. It's actually why I find, as a level 1, as a reasonably recent level 1, I find myself engaging in the more complex domain than I possibly should, simply because a lot of the questions that are being asked, a lot of the judge calls I'm making are literally the first time I'm making that.
That doesn't get better, by the way. It never gets better.
Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah. Thank you, Spell Queller.
Flashback? Oh.
Spell Queller Flashback and Spell Queller and Crystal Shard in the same deck. Why would you even do that?
It's called combos.
So this is just very quickly recapping the important things about each of the ways that you should resolve problems in these categories. Sense, categorize, act for simple. Sense, analyze, respond for complicated. Probe, the different one. Probe, where you're actually asking more questions than just analyze, and more widely, and possibly even what if questions. Sense and respond, and then finally, the key one for chaotic is act first. Act to establish some sort of order, and then begin to treat it as a more reasonable situation.
Would you say that perhaps the complex ones are when the players don't have all the information? If the players
Absolutely.
don't know what happened in the game, and
Absolutely.
you have to go deeper, okay.
Unknown unknowns.
Yeah, so even the players may not know what they're asking as well.
Yeah.
Well, the players don't know what they're trying to ask necessarily, and you have to try and work through that with them
Yeah.
in a way that educates. It's very difficult to work through them in a way where you're teaching them without helping them.
Yeah. Well, I had a hand last turn, but it's not
Yes.
here anymore, and I don't know what happened.
Oh, someone's actually done that.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
they've been like, I had a hand last time, but I'm not sure where it's
I
gone.
shuffled my hand into my
And then
deck.
a spectator has been like, didn't you shuffle your hand into your library when you fetched your when you cracked your fetcher? And he's like, oh, I did.
I've done that in Tournament Magic, yeah.
Or the one where or I love the one during drafting processes where they've just passed their pick. Where
Yeah.
No, yeah, they passed the
pile
pile
instead
yeah.
of, you know.
Yeah, that could be a
We haven't done it. Let's never have that happen. A very good one I've had is, Judge, it's turn 6 or 7, and this isn't my deck. He drew a foil that's not in his deck, and they were playing an almost identical 75,
With the same sleeve.
and the same sleeves.
I've heard I've shuffled my hand into my opponent's deck before. Not personally, but
I had a really
If
weird
the
one
60 is the same,
in a draft.
continue playing.
that is exactly like, I'm just like, are you playing the exact same list? And they're like, yes, we playing it together. And I'm just like, continue playing and exchange decks at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Really weird one in draft a couple of weeks ago at F&M is one person opened all 3 packs at the start and passed all 3 packs.
Right.
And but it was pretty easily fixed because he didn't shuffle them.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it was like, oh, you passed a big stack of cards to his left. It's like, oh, what's this?
I mean, that one probably falls into a complicated one rather than a complex.
But if you come
because-
across that every week, then it might become a simple one.
Yes.
You don't come across that every week.
Also,
As soon as they shuffle
that sounds like the worst limited format ever. Like 15 cards, 15
45 cards, you pick
45
one.
card
Well,
draft.
yeah, and it's like you've got 15 cards in front of you, and it's all chaff. Like, what is this?
Sorry, Chris.
Would an example of your chaotic one be the situation that happened in Vegas?
What was that one?
Which situation? Just
With the
The
2
one where they had 2 rounds in 4 hours because they had recreated or whatever?
That situation in Vegas.
Yes.
Yeah, that one.
manually
that was a
repairing
shot.
2,000 person event.
No, that was Vegas.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yes, I would definitely describe that as chaotic. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
With the main
Wasn't it
works.
round 5 or 6 that they rebuilt the entire tournament?
One of the key, I mean,
Later
we're
on,
not,
yeah.
I didn't talk about it in this presentation. There are literally books written about this stuff. There's I've given you the briefest overview. One of the things that they talk about in terms of chaotic, the chaotic domain is, in fact, all 4 domains is the terms of practice. So simple is best practice because it's what you know what works. Complex and complicated and complex both have their own forms of. One of them is novel and one of them is emerging. The chaotic one is new practice. You are pioneering what the correct method is, and what you come up with may not end up being the most correct method because you are pioneering it. And in the case of manually repairing a 2,000-person tournament, yeah, that's probably a fairly good chaotic domain. Like, how would you even start doing that? Right? So now just some final notes that the important thing, as I said before, Cynefin domains are not fixed. They really depend on experience. Where possible, you want to shift things to a lower level problem. So complex to complicated, complicated to simple. Chaotic to wherever you can make it. Literally, it gets back to act first. And domain shifting doesn't necessarily happen at the time you are addressing the event. You can make the domain shift simply by preparation. Going before you do your judging for 50Q, browse the IPG. Before you do a pre-release, read the release notes. It takes situations where you're going to have to try and work out the ruling on the fly to something relatively simple. Think hostage taker in a recent release. It received errata just prior to the pre-release. I don't think I would have liked to have not read that prior to my first encounter with that card.
And I think that's the really big takeaway, is that we can shift by preparation, which means if we as a whole community, if all of us get better at doing things like reading the set notes, reading the release notes, reading the changes in RPG, discussing them with each other, discussing difficult situations with each other, it means we all agree that we're hitting these complex situations. What's the third one? Complex?
Complex.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
So
complex.
Yeah, we all agree we're hitting a lot of complex situations. It'd be great if we could move a lot of them to complicated, where there's a process I have to go through and it's difficult, but you don't start by going, oh God, this is a puzzle, I need to solve it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The other thing, just one little minor note: if you ever read about this stuff elsewhere, depending on the age of the document, simple used to be called obvious.
Okay.
Okay. So, and that's it. Any questions? Okay.
Just one.
Yes.
If you could fit, like, summarize this onto the size of a magic card,
Yes.
could you? So that judges could maybe keep it in their pocket?
Yes, certainly.
Quick read?
I mean, that slide before with the 4 squares sort of gives a little bit of...
Absolutely, yeah. There's actually a really good, if you look at the, each of these ones here, there's actually the images of the Cynefin model that you'll find online often have all of this stuff all on the one slide. So
This one
Yeah.
would
Yeah,
be
I like this
really cool
yes,
to have as like a magic card sized
it is very
template,
available.
and maybe
Something you can keep in your wallet.
Yep.
yeah.
Yes, it is very available. In fact, so are much more complex ones.
Good.
Okay, cool.
I don't want to try and read that at magic card size.
No, there is a much. This is freely available on the web.
That's a chaos version.
I love the 1 + 1
Yes.
= 2 and the guy going, nice.
Yes.
I'm assuming he's saying that.
So this
gotta be
does
Nice.
this does illustrate something I should have mentioned. There is a reason why they're in this order. It can go really easily. You can really easily go from simple to chaos by treating a more complex problem as a simple one. Okay? I mean, all of the things that the other judges talked about earlier about brand, about integrity, about people trusting you as a judge can be wrecked really quickly by doing the wrong thing for the wrong situation.
DQing somebody for an extra card or something
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
To make things really, really easy, simple heuristic is, don't we just want to put a tap symbol on this? We want to rotate everything to the right.
Yeah.
If you hit yes,
Yeah,
so,
sure.
you don't want to make simple problems chaotic, obviously, but everything else you want to try and shift it down.
Didn't Shadowmoor have the untapped symbol?
Yes.
Damn.
And we're never going back.
Am I never going back?
No, didn't it just win the poll?
Yeah,
Law and beat Kamigawa?
Oh, no.
It was rigged.
Most definitely.
Rigged.
Jack.
Law and Shadow War, not. Let's go.
Okay.
It's not said.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.